Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Managing Large Lecture Workshop. My name is Kelly Smith. I'm the director of the CFE, and we are so excited to kick off our Seminars and Teaching Excellence series with all of you today. Thank you very much for being here. Today's workshop is the first of 4 that we will offer this spring, where we will discuss ideas and best practices for improving our teaching and experiences in the classroom. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's workshop, Dr. Mark Hartlaub. Mark is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, a professor of psychology, and has been teaching at TAMUCC for 21 years. He has a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with us on managing large lecture courses, so let's please welcome Dr. Mark Hartlaub.
Thank you, Kelly. I am going to talk a little bit about managing, but it's really how to be effective in large lecture classes. For those of you who don't know me, again, I'm Mark Hartlaub. I've been here, started as a visiting assistant professor in 1998, and I've been here ever since. Because you might think, well, he's the dean, an administrator. Is that really what I want in terms of teaching me how to teach? Doesn't he just push papers and go to meetings? Yes, that's true. But I've been teaching for 30 years at the college level. And so I've had a lot of experience, with large classes, 200, 250, and then also 50, 100, da. And what you're always trying to do is to keep those students engaged. So, but thank you very much for coming today. I appreciate it. So, let's see if we get going here. Oh, the on switch. Oh, okay. All right, so I got to figure it out now. So what is a large lecture course? We have 3 giant classrooms here, if you don't know that. CI 113, CI 138, and Bay Hall 103. Those are the giant ones. But then we have lots of other ones. And it certainly is unfortunate sometimes that the size of the course is determined by the size of the building. I remember Dave Below saying the worst thing they ever did at Kansas was build large classrooms, because then once you had them, what are you going to do with them? You can't leave them empty, so you got to fill them up. So what exactly is a large lecture course? So this is just in terms of definition. I'm going to talk about a class of 50 or more. Now that doesn't mean that some of the things I'm saying are not applicable to classes of 30 or 35 or something like that. But when I'm talking large, that's typically what we're talking about. If I said this is only for classes 200 and above, then we're only really talking a handful of disciplines that do that. So that's going to be the working definition for what it's worth. It's about 50. Okay, so what makes a good class? By the way, I always reject one-sentence solutions. Somebody says to me, well, you know what the key to teaching is, don't you? Whatever they say next, I'm not going to believe, by the way, because I just don't believe stuff like that. Well, you know what the one thing is? I just bristle at that. I started when I was 14. And that was just sort of because I was a teenager. So when people started a sentence, Mark, you got to admit, I was like, no, I don't. Whatever it is, the sun sets in the west. No, it doesn't. Not in the Panama Canal. Whatever. Okay, it would be something. So I hate stuff like that. However, let's just say one of the key. That's much more how I talk. One of the keys to effective teaching really is student engagement. It's that are the students engaged in the learning? And I think that can and does happen in large lecture, small lecture, class discussion, small group, group project, service learning, undergraduate research, flipped classrooms, team teaching, learning community, all of those. It also doesn't happen in all of those too, okay? So it's not like this method always works. I have been in all of those where they don't work. I've been in all those where they do work. And so I am in some ways advocating for the large lecture. Because some people say, well, the large lecture is horrible. It never does anything. I don't think so. I've been in large lectures that have been terrific. I've been in other ones that are, boring, just like this. And so it's really not the method. So what we're talking about is when we have the large lecture presentation, how can we make that as good as we possibly can? All right, I went to a conference years ago, and I can't remember this woman's name. I wish I could reference her. But she talked about the 4 metaphors for college teaching. Her name has escaped me, but the metaphors have stuck with me because I talk about this with students, and students always laugh. And it's an interesting metaphor, okay? So the metaphors for college teaching, one is the gardener. If you're the gardener, you plant the seed. Okay? Truth. Go think about that. Okay? And maybe that semester they won't, but then next semester they're like, you know that stuff you said about truth? I get it now. It's like, yeah, okay, good. That's part of the gardener. Or you sort of, you just plant the seed, and then as they're struggling, you're sort of, helping them. You provide, the water and the sunshine, etc. Then there's the midwife. The midwife, as a metaphor, is that students have the information. You're going to draw it out of them. Okay? So this is sort of the Socratic method. We're like, well, I'm kind of wondering about this. And like, well, what do you think? That's the midwife. It's like, well, I don't know. It's like, I think you do know. Think about it. Oh, okay. And then students really know more than they think they know. So again, you sort of are helping to draw that out of them. The Barracuda. The Barracuda doesn't really like students, likes to intimidate students. Students will answer a question in the first class or two. They're like, well, I think this. That's wrong. Okay? Very common mistake. Very common mistake. That's wrong. Let me tell you why it's wrong. Okay? And then no more hands up for the rest of the semester. Okay? That's the Barracuda. Okay? Sort of like, I am in charge, you are not. I am correct, you are not. I am the professor, you are not. And I mean, you can guess how that goes for the rest of the semester. And then there's the banker. Okay? And that's the one I'm kind of talking about here today. Okay? The banker makes deposits into the empty heads of students. That's what bankers do. And bankers often like large lecture. Okay? In the old days, it would be overheads. Okay, here are the overheads. Question, we don't have time for a question. Here we go. Da, da, da. And now it's PowerPoint. Okay, da, 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 question, we don't have time for a question. Da, 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 we got to get through the slides. Da, da, da. And so they are making deposits into the empty heads of students. That's what bankers do. That's the fourth of the metaphors. Now, we go further about that from the metaphors, but I just wanted to say those are four. So if somebody is a banker, and again, bankers often end up in large lecture classes. Why? I don't know. We try to hide Barracudas, but I don't know exactly where bankers end up. But they're often in the large ones. One belief they have is that students don't learn unless I teach them. Unless they're like, I have to cover chapter 2. You are incapable of learning chapter 2 on your own. Okay? Yes, it's there. You could read it, but nothing happens unless I say it. So I have to cover everything. That's one of the challenges that they have is they don't learn unless I teach them. And they cover too much material. I remember Pam Briard and I were at a teaching conference years ago. And the woman who was presenting, and she was talking about general psychology textbooks. She goes, yeah, your students ever tell you that you're covering too much material? And you can hear, I mean, it's like 200 people, everyone's groaning, yeah. And she said, well, maybe they're right. You could hear a pin drop, like, And her point was like, if this is a science and we're adding information, I mean, are the textbooks just going to get to be 800 pages, 1,000, 1,200? Like, we have to take out things. And it was kind of like, take out things? And it's like, yeah. So bankers cover too much material. We've had this in terms of Harvey last year. I mean, I know this I've heard from several of the chairs and several faculty, that when we had Harvey last year, we had to cut out a week, right? Everyone had to look at their syllabus and say, this is what I was going to cover. Now I'm going to cover less. There were some people who had a very difficult time with that. I can't do that. Well, you have to. Well, I can't. I have to. Yes, you can. You can. You are the expert. Okay? Take something out. And it's sort of like, and they just have to kind of think, if these students don't get that week, what's going to happen to them? I think that they can still live a full, productive life. I think. Okay. Another in terms of the banker challenges, again, slow down. You don't have to, well, you have to, it's like, and sometimes, again, something will happen in class, it's a little bit slower, I get behind, and then you know what I do? I cut stuff out. I'm not like, well, next day we got no questions. It's like, slow down. That's one of the things that I think is very important for bankers. And then try other methods. Again, one thing you do is through the slides. There's another way, and we're going to try to slow down. And actually, I'm going to do a couple of those today. Okay? All right, so these tips are all designed to create and maintain student engagements. That's what you're trying to do. So all of these are really the same thing. How do you keep students engaged in the large lecture classroom? How can you do that? All right. Very first thing is I do have some suggestions about PowerPoint. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean you have to use PowerPoint. Some people do, some people do not. But if you use PowerPoint, these are some suggestions. And again, these are my suggestions. One, minimal use of text. Okay? You see that. Okay? And this is all teaching, by the way. This is all teaching, so this is all good stuff. Keep text to a minimum. Isn't that funny? That's for keep text to a minimum. Brrr, okay? Keep text to a minimum. No more than 5 bullet points. I mean, they're just like they're violating every rule as you go. Okay? It's sort of meta, right? It's like okay, that's bad. Now, that information, I just took that, okay, and I said, keep it brief, use pictures, clear graphs and figures, check the font, and don't read the slides. That's it. That has the same information as the last one. Why do you have all that stuff? Especially if this is you, you're teaching it, you already know it. Do you need all that stuff? No, you don't need that. Okay? I use the PowerPoint as an outline. So it has the word. I know what the word means. Okay? I mean, I teach this material. I know what it means. I don't need the whole definition written out. I just have that, and then I will define it. And the students can either look it up or they could write it down, but it's not up on the slide because it doesn't need to be. This, I think, is much clearer. You'll notice, too, all of my slides have pictures. Every single one has a picture or a diagram, a shape, something. I think people learn better with something on there. Okay? And this is giving a good presentation, and then we've got here Dr. Rhodes and Dr. Burkich, and it's like, oh, okay, this is what we're talking about, but giving a good presentation. That's it, and then there it is. Very, very brief. Now, I've heard things like never more than 8 words. I violated that. Okay, I mean, I just violated there. That's low, but I do think that's one important thing. Try to keep stuff off the slides. Every semester, I take more and more off the slides, more and more text off the slide. So that's one. This is the light background. With the dark font, I think it's the easiest to see. I've had debates with Steve Seidel about this. Okay, but if you're in doubt, I'm right. Okay. He believes that's better. He told me originally to do PowerPoint. Always have dark background, and so you can see it better. I actually asked an expert on this once on websites. I said, can people see these differently? Because I like Steve, okay, but he really thinks that's better. I really don't think that's better, okay? But that's up to you if you want to just kind of break it up. So then you can use dark background. I don't like that as well. Then the horrible background, which some people do, right? Green background with red font. Oh, that'll be good. It's like, have you ever looked at it? It's horrible. Okay, it's horrible. It's unreadable. Okay, so be careful. They're like, oh, this looks nice. I don't care if it looks nice. Is it readable? And especially look in the back row from CI 113 and tell me if really that stuff in the background is helpful. My guess is it's not. I mean, you've all seen getting emails from people, right? And they have the background. It looks cool, but it makes it slightly more difficult to read. Isn't that what we want? Is readable? Okay. Here's an example. I just was listening the last couple days as I've been driving around to this song, Shiloh. I didn't know anything about Shiloh, and I'm not a historian. So I didn't know, and I'm like, Shiloh? I'm like, okay. I mean, I listened to the song, and I'm like, sounds like it's Civil War. So I looked it up, so this just as an example. So I'm not an expert on Shiloh. But I looked it up. There it is. And I just pulled that from Wikipedia. That's one way you could do the slide. Here's another way. Isn't that better? I think that's better. And it's exactly the same information. I just looked at the last slide, by the way, when I made this slide. There it is. It's an early engagement. It was in southwestern Tennessee. Early success by the Confederates. They made some gains, but then they lost, and eventually the Union won. And it was very, very bloody. 23,000 casualties. That's it. And this is, you know, an artist's rendering of the Battle of Shiloh. I think that's better. And again, you can kind of see those other ones, but it's sort of like, well, this one takes a little bit of work. Yeah, it takes a little bit of work. You can just sort of throw up all of the text, but this is much, much better. I think, again, when I'm looking at Battle of Shiloh, it's like, and partly seeing this picture, I'm like, oh, okay. I got an idea what we're talking about here. That's an example. Again, use minimal text, more pictures if you can. So that's one. And that's just a couple, you know, things about PowerPoint. And that's even more of a pet peeve. Light backgrounds I like better than dark backgrounds. 2, start off with something interesting. So actually I'm going to do a little demonstration here, okay, that I use in class. And you can use a question, a current problem, a current event, something to grab their attention. So when you start a new chapter, you don't say, all right, now we're beginning chapter 3 and we're going to do this. It's like, if you can bring in something, a current event, if you could, something that kind of grabs their attention. So this is an example. This is what I use in general psych and then also in lifespan development. When I'm studying development, and obviously this is not particularly important, when we're studying development, we have 2 different methods. The longitudinal design, Or the cross-sectional design. Longitudinal is the same people over time. Cross-sectional is if right now I study 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 6-year-olds. Well, then I'm looking at age. But another way to do it is to get some 2-year-olds, wait 2 years, then they're 4, test them again, wait 2 more years, and test them when they're 6. The second one takes 4 years to do. The first one takes 1 summer, right? There's longitudinal and cross-sectional. So as I go over those, I say, okay, this is longitudinal design. This is what it is. It's follow the same people over time. I actually pulled this out of, I don't know, it was some slide that was given to me by the publisher. And I remember looking, I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool slide, okay? I'm like, that's obviously the same young woman when she was a child. And I'm like, okay, that's what a longitudinal design is. And then I thought, this is just for fun. When we start talking about development, I said, all right, that's kind of interesting. Let's look at that. So I started this. And so I do this as kind of an icebreaker, kind of a starter for this area. Who is that? Hillary Clinton, right. Good. Anybody know this is a hard one? It's not Mark Hartlaub, no. That's a tough one, right? Very good. Okay, there's Lady Gaga. Right now? Don't you see, you're like, oh yeah, oh yeah. Look at her mouth. Look at it. Hasn't changed at all. Look at that. It's exactly the same, right? Isn't that weird? I mean, her smile hasn't changed one bit at all. Okay. Yeah, you see the eyebrows. It's like, oh yeah, of course. Okay. Now, part of the reason I do that, I mean, it's fun. It's always the last slide, by the way, is, again, it's just kind of fun. The students always get a kick out of it. You know, like, were you a skateboarder? You know, were you a drug? I was like, okay, this is back in the day, okay? Now, that's an example, though, of something that kind of grabs their attention. So again, I've got this one on longitudinal designs, and it's like, okay, but it's just guess who. Now you can see it takes 5 minutes, but it's fun. So partway through, when we're starting this new concept, we kind of do that. It's fun. That's all it is. Now, does it have to do with it? Yes, to a degree. Again, it's not like, here, let's watch this video. It has nothing to do with anything. It's not that. It actually is related, but it's fun. And it's sort of like, oh, can we pick out people from pictures of long ago? So that's an example of what you might do to kind of get things going. All right. Now, the change-up, this is actually sort of an official term, is what's called a change-up. And that means that during the large lecture, we do something that changes things up. So typically, during like a 50-minute lecture, people sort of start losing it at about 15 or 20. Okay? And in fact, I remember reading an article recently where a guy was talking about a student. He was sitting in the back of the class, student in front of him. He literally had his pen, and at 15 minutes, put his head down for 5 minutes, then popped up, started taking notes again. I mean, so that's what we want to try to avoid, is that sort of like, I'm fading. And much less 2.5-hour classes, hour and 15-minute classes. I mean, they need something to kind of like, whoa, okay, we need to change things up besides just me going through the slides. So these are some change-ups which allow active participation by the students. So what can we do? One is a pop quiz. I do that. Now, pop quiz, I'm very clear on my syllabus. There is no credit for pop quizzes. Okay? So some pop quiz, you didn't say anything about. Okay, pop quiz, this doesn't count. Okay? But what it does is I just ask some multiple choice questions about material that we have covered. And I usually give 3 or 4. And what it's designed to do, by the way, is to reduce anxiety. So people are like, oh, okay, I got this. And then I tell them, I said, if you had no idea what any of the answers were, then you should be feeling some anxiety. And hopefully that's going to push you to study a little bit. But here's an example. So which of these is correct? Is incorrect? D, right? Okay, so that's an example, and I do a pop quiz. I probably do that 4 or 5 times a semester. And then I ask myself, somewhere in your notes, write these down. And we just go through 4 of them or whatever, and then I give the answers. And it's just like, oh, okay. But see what we just did? It's just like, oh, we just kind of stopped. And it's like, sometimes it's from earlier that day. Sometimes it's from the last class period or the one before that. But it's like we're checking on things, during the semester. Again, rather than like waiting till the midterm or waiting till the final, we're checking on things. It doesn't count, but it tells students, oh, okay, I need to really kind of work on this. Or it's like, hey, I'm doing fine. Yes? Just on screen. I ask them to write down the answers on their notes. But then, yeah, it's just, and I don't do clickers. So I'm really not interested. I mean, I know that's part of the reason sometimes people use clickers. It's like, I want to know how the students are doing. I get an idea if, I ask something like this. Again, you all said D. Okay, then it's D. Sometimes I get like, well, D, well, C, D, okay, well, then we're not quite so sure on that. And then sometimes no one will say anything because they don't want to admit, And so there's always I always look for 2 things in the answer. 1 is whether it's correct, and 2, the confidence in that answer. D? That's different than D. I always make a note of that. I go, that's good. Let's that confidence. D. It's D. I'm like, okay, good. And and they're right. Hey, see? Confidence, but inaccurate. All right, so pop quiz is 1. That's one way, I think, to kind of break things up. It's easily done. Just put a couple multiple choice questions on there. You could put short answer questions, lots of different ways you can kind of do that. That's pop quiz, that's 1. Another one is a demonstration. This now, obviously, I teach psychology. Psychology is a little bit easier to do demonstrations than some other classes. Granted, that's true. But here's an example of a demonstration that I've used. And this is in sensation and perception, which can be a little dry. So there's the trichromatic theory, which is one of the theories of color vision. And then the other one is the opponent process model. Those are 2 theories. So this one, I've already gone over trichromatic. Now I'm ready to go over the opponent process model. And so I use this as an example. So everyone stare at this and stare kind of right at that point there. And this would be about 30 seconds. Just keep staring right at that point. Okay, keep staring at that point. Blink, see something? You should. All right, that's an example of the opponent process model, okay, where you are seeing negative after images. You should have seen the American flag. Anybody see that? Okay, hopefully we waited long enough, okay? And that's what you should be seeing. And then I talk about the opponent process model and how it leads to negative after images, and negative after images like that are one of the reasons, that's some of the evidence that the opponent process model works. Now see, that's something very, very easy. I mean, it's done in class, sort of like I have to it usually takes a minute or 2 to do it, but students like it. It's a way of, again, kind of breaking it up. So if you can have a demonstration in the front of class, do something in the front with others. Another part when I'm doing shaping, I usually bring a student down, and then we do clapping, and we get the student to stand on a table, something like that. Always works, and it takes about 5 minutes, but it helps them to understand the concept, and again, like I said, breaks up the class. So pop quiz is 1, demonstrations, then there's small group work. Now small group work, I'll admit, that can be difficult in a large lecture class. I do it some. It's a little bit easier when you can kind of move the chairs. But when you have stadium seating, it's difficult to do. There's no question about that. In fact, back in the day when my classes were all 40, I used to make people turn their chairs. I made them turn their chairs. Like, oh, I'm in this group here. It's like, no, you're not. You're in this group over here, which is nowhere. Turn your chair, and you had to make a square or a triangle or a pentagon. You had to do one of those. That really increases student engagement in small group work. So small group work can be done in a large lecture class. It's with 2 people. Sometimes it's 4 people in the front, can kind of look back. And then you can give them a small project. One of the things I like to do is to give them opportunities to create exam questions. And in fact, I'll often take 2 questions from the group and I'll put them on the exam. They create multiple choice questions. And then, sometimes we have to kind of look at the distractors in terms of are these accurate and are they clear, etc. But we can do small group work like that. Sometimes I call it show and tell. The difference between show and tell. Tell is me saying, this is very difficult. For example, like defining mental disorder. I could say, it is very difficult to define mental disorder. That's one thing I can do. But when I get to the abnormal psych chapter, sometimes I'll give out a handout, and it'll be short descriptions of people, and I say, you have to decide whether the person has a mental disorder or does not. And they're difficult. And that's the point, is they're kind of looking at it and they're like, oh, this is kind of difficult. Yeah, there we go. You just understood that it's difficult. I could stand there and say, this is difficult, or I could have you work on something, and then you come to that conclusion 10 minutes later, and you're like, yeah, this is kind of hard. There we go. All right? That's showing them something rather than just telling them. So small group work can work also very, very well. Summary of lecture, multiple choice questions, defining terms, solving problems, any of those sorts of things. Summary of the lecture is sometimes a good one too. It's sort of like, well, summarize what we've gone over today. Do that with others, and then you just sort of call on groups randomly. You can certainly do that. Multiple choice questions, I just said. You can define terms. Again, like define what it means to have a mental disorder. Define what it means, the difference between being in love and liking somebody. And again, there's no correct answer, but then it leads us into the work that we talk about.
From your experience in like this very short 50-minute slots of like the Monument of Friday, what do you think is like the minimum time that a small group work needs to be?
Minimum 5, maximum 10. Yeah. I kind of say, yeah, you've got this amount of time, and then I'll kind of look, and if it looks like they're all sort of getting done, then I might wrap it up a little bit earlier. But I would say 5 to 7 minutes usually. And that's one of the tough ones too. When I had a small class of 40, and we would have a small group, and I just walk around the class and kind of listen. Somebody told me years ago, and I think it's very good advice. It's like, let the group work. Let the group work. You have worked in small group with adults, and are you always on task? I'm not. I mean, somebody makes a joke, somebody says this, somebody this, and we get back. Allow students to do the same thing. So it's not like, hey, back on task. Let them get to the end, because they will do that on their own too. They'll kind of be looking, and again, it's not like, hey, you're laughing back there. I want to go and find out what's going on. No, that's okay if they're laughing, because they'll kind of go, and they're like, all right, let's go back, and then they get back. So back off, just listen, and let them do it. But I usually give them a time, 5 to 7 minutes, something like that. All right, another one is in-class writing. Okay, this one I like. I've been doing this now probably the last 5 years, where what I've been doing in the large lecture class, I struggle, because again, I'm talking like 200 people in a class, 225, something like that. It is good to have them in class. That's good. They will do better if they come to class. However, taking attendance is also difficult in a class that big. So what I've moved to is in-class writing, where I tell them, I said, I will give you in-class writing 8 times at random during the semester. 8 times, randomly. And then you need to be there for at least 5 of those. Okay? And if you're there for those 5, then you get full credit. Each one is like worth 10 points. So that's 50 points. Now, that allows them some, times that they're not there. I tell them, this is actually a good example in statistics. So I said, it's random. Random. I have a statistics book. I look in the back under the table of random numbers, and that's how I pick the days. So it's like, well, he had one on Monday. He won't have one on Wednesday. It's random. Okay? I'm not picking it. Okay? And sometimes it's inconvenient for me. It doesn't matter. It's random. You got to stick with that. But what does that mean? It means people are sort of like, well, I guess I better be there. Good. I'm glad that you're there, because you're more likely to be there and be participating. So let me give you an example of an in-class writing. I'd actually like you to do this. I usually do 5 minutes, and then I wrap it up at about 4.5. We'll just do it for 2. But I want you to just do this process, even if it's just for 2 minutes somewhere. All right, so here's an example. This is one I've used. Think about the development you have experienced in your own life. Do you think you will be much different in 20 years? In 40 years? In what ways will you be the same? Different. So I'd like you to just take 2 minutes somehow and write that down, please. And then I'll stop after 2. And then I'll tell you what I do. Okay, that's about 2 minutes. Like I said, I usually give them, I call it 5-minute writing. And I grade this, but I grade it in terms of participation. And I tell them, I said, if you write 2 words, yeah, you're not going to get, But it's sort of like, give me some effort. Okay, that's all it is. It's pass-fail. Either they do it or they don't do it. I say, you got to put your name on it. And then I stop them. I say, all right, put your name on it, finish it, put your name on it, pass it to the side, and then I collect them. All right? And then I give them credit for that. Students tend to like it. I mean, you just saw what we just did. It's like, all right, we're talking, I've actually done this in personality, I've done this in lifespan development, either one. And it's just sort of, it stops, and I try to think of interesting things for them to write about. Sometimes, like when we talk about dreams, I said, do you think dreams are meaningful? Why or why not? They're interested in this. And then the second thing is they need to know that I care. So I look through these, and at the next class period, I share some of the responses. So here's an example. In this question that I've asked before, I don't see myself being much more different other than having a steady job and hopefully a family. I'm a stubborn person and probably always will be. I will always be the same in a way because my 19-year-old self lives on in my memory. I'll still probably love coffee and hate Will Ferrell. Okay. Now, I'll admit, I get 100 of these, 150. I pick out some that are amusing because it's amusing. This is it's just for fun. Okay, so I don't always pick the most serious, but I'll go through them, and some of them I really like, and then I'll pick out, and then some of them, like I said, I'll pick some goofy ones just for fun, and that's an example. I believe that my mind will mature as far as family, responsibility, and financials go, but my sense of humor and my beliefs will stay generally the same. Interesting. I will be, if not the same, then more patient than I am now. I'll still be my crazy, loud self when I'm with my family or friends. I like this one. Like right now in my life, I hate seeing cops. But maybe when I'm 38, I'll love seeing cops. Yeah, I put it on because it's funny. Okay, but the only reason I can see myself being different is if a traumatic event occurred and it changed me physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Interesting. In 40 years, I will be a sad, sad mess and bald, but hopefully not. Okay. Anyway, this is an example of when I share these, and I try to pick different people, because again, they got their names on them. So I try to pick different ones. And then when they see theirs on, they're like, oh, okay. Again, this is a big class. And it's sort of like, now, Hartlaub might not know my name, but he read my response, and he picked my response. And so I try to do that. So one, it breaks up the class, but it also is a way of sort of, trying to remove some of the anonymity of the big class. And so I do this, and I give some of the student responses, but they also like it because it's, oh, this is what my fellow students are thinking, because they don't often know that. They don't know exactly what their students are thinking. So that's an example is in-class writing. I've heard of 1-minute writing. You can do it. I've never done that. That's really fast. And then again, there's 3 and 5. You kind of do it anywhere in between. But I like the idea. And again, it comes out. It's random. And so it picks out. Sometimes it's like, oh, I really wouldn't want to do it today. But I'm at the mercy of chance, so I must do it. And then I just kind of look at the topic, and I think, all right, what's an interesting topic? What might students kind of like writing about? And I pick that, and then I put it in. And I try to put it in, again, somewhere obviously in the middle or, 15 to 30 minutes into the lecture. Active learning, another one is a video. Okay? Again, these can be overused, but here's a real quick one here. You recognize who that is? Pavlov, right? Let's see. Whoop, I think I already lost it. I already lost it, right? Yeah, I already lost it. Sorry. We can't go back. My bad. I was trying to get it. It's a short video. When we talk about Pavlov and classical conditioning, there are lots of good examples on the internet that are 1 minute long, minute and a half long. In fact, the seminar leader found one time, and it was a guy, he had a soft pellet gun, and then he had this little, it was from Best Buy. And I can't remember, it's a red button that you push. And it goes, bargain! Something like that. And it just yells, and he'd go, ah! And then he would shoot his friend, ow, with his pellet gun. And then, and he just did it, I don't know, like a week. And then he did it, and the guy, hey! He goes, hey, guys, go. Very, very funny, students like it, and then we kind of talk about, all right, what is the unconditional stimulus? What is the conditional stimulus? They like it. Very, very easy, very, very quick thing to break it up. And I'm still of the generation, I'm like, well, there might be some good demonstrations online, and it's like 50 of them, okay? And they're all really, really good. So, some closing thoughts. 1, make it worthwhile to come to class. That's sometimes I'll hear where faculty will say, well, I don't want to put up my slides because I want them to come to class. Make it worthwhile to come to class. If you really are just reading the slides, I don't know why they should come to class. I mean, there's no reason for somebody to come to class if that's what you're doing. Make it worthwhile. Make it enjoyable. Make it fun. Even if it's sort of like, I mean, I do that. I pick some exam questions right from lecture. It's things that I said in class. They're not in the book. Oh, you mean you have to come to class? Yeah. It's worthwhile to come to class. So that's 1. Whatever it takes, make it worthwhile to come to class so that they come to class. Because otherwise, if they say, well, I don't really need to come to class, I can just read the book. Yeah, they can. But you have much more to give than the book. That's what you need to do. Be willing to fail. That's another one. I mean, it's just another tip. I have tried many things that don't work. And they're bad. And I'm like, whoa, that didn't work. Okay? But I can tell you what the safe thing is, to do nothing. And to just continue to lecture and lecture and lecture. That doesn't work. And it's like, you got to try something. I remember Katie Santos, who's not here in English, she tried Shakespeare Unseen. And I remember the first time she was doing that, I went and visited the class, and I had my fingers crossed. I'm like, well, I hope this works. It worked great. But it could have been a disaster. And she knew that. She knew, like, well, this could be a disaster. But it's like, be willing to fail. You got to be willing to take chances. Try something in class. Try some demonstrations. Maybe they'll work, maybe not. Be flexible. That's another one. I always learned this working in CI. Back in the day, they had Blimpie subs there. And Blimpie subs, the bread would kind of burn, and then the fire alarm went off. Remember that? Remember the people who worked in CI? Right? And so we would probably have 4, 5 fire drills during the semester. And, you know, the class is 50 minutes, 10 to 10:50, fire drills at 10:40. I'd tell them, don't come back. Okay? And so we'd lose class time. We'd lose 20 minutes here. We'd lose 5 minutes here. We'd lose that. It's like, what do you need to do? Well, we got to do it. It's like, no, you have to be flexible. Okay? Be flexible about anything. I was just hearing about somebody who, in their classroom, it was really stinking. So he took the class outside. I'm like, hey, look at that. Thinking on their feet. I was like, that's awesome. Good. That's exactly what you need to do. Teach to the back row. I firmly believe this, and you know this too. I mean, we've tried not to have giant classes, especially for first-year students, especially for at-risk first-year students. I really believe very good students, they'll do anywhere. I mean, if they're in large classes, they'll do fine. They're in small classes, they'll do fine. If they sit in the front row, they'll do fine. If they're in the back row, they'll do fine. I mean, good students are going to be good students, okay? And that's the kind of student that you were. And so wherever you sat, you did fine. Whatever the class was, you did fine. That's what you need to do. But in our real large lecture classes, sometimes the weaker students do sit in the back. Not always, but sometimes they sit in the back. Need to make sure they know that you know that they're there. Okay? So that's what I mean by teach to the back row. It's kind of easy to just sort of in the front, but you want to make sure that you're paying attention to those people in the back too. Teach to the back row. Make sure that they know. Use your strengths. This is a very important one. We had an adjunct a few years ago, and she was an LSSP, licensed specialist in school psychology, and worked in the school district and did very well. And then she was teaching lifespan development, and she never talked at all about her experiences. And I remember telling her, I was like, you have some great information that you can. She goes, well, it doesn't fit easily in the text. I said, I don't care. I said, pick out one of those chapters and skip it. Skip? Yes, skip it. Skip the chapter that you think is least important and talk about your experiences. Talk about the stuff that you know. And she was like, well, okay. And it's like, that's what the students want too. That's better for the students. Okay? It's like this text, well, these chapters were created. Okay, yeah, they were not created by God though. They were created by an author. That's it. Okay? Use your strengths. Really, I mean, that's especially for new faculty that sometimes feel beholden to the textbook. Well, I've got to stick with the textbook. I mean, yeah, you don't want to just throw the thing out, but you skip chapters. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, we're not going to do that. Yeah, we don't have time to do that. But I'm going to do this. And especially, you are an expert in an area. So that area of expertise, share that with the students. The students are going to be happier that you did. Everyone's going to be happier that you did. And again, I don't like one thing, but yeah, I really believe that in the first 2 weeks, what students are getting from you is, do you care about their learning? Now, there's lots of different ways you can do that. I mean, you can be easy, you can be difficult. You can be demanding, there's lots of different ways you can do it. But do you care about their learning? Well, the first thing is, I hope that you do care about their learning. And the second thing is, I think you need to show that. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. But you need to show to them that, yes, I actually do care about your learning. I do care about how you're doing. I do care about your success. I want you to succeed in this class. I'm not trying to weed people out. Again, look to your left, look to your right. Only one of you is going to be standing at the end of this class. That's not what we're trying to do at TAMU CC. I hope you already know that, right? That's not what we're trying to do. So what we need to do they know that you care about their learning? Hopefully, they do. That's the end of what I have. So, are there questions or comments? Yes. Thank you.
On the Shiloh slides, when you had the really, really busy text Shiloh slide, would you then make that your notes at the bottom of the slide, or would you just minimize the notes?
You could do either one. I mean, I think, frankly, I would do that differently based on my experience. I mean, some of the topics, I mean, obviously, topics change somewhat. But some of the topics that I teach, for example, in general psych, I've been teaching for 30 years. I mean, classical conditioning, Pavlov did it in 1905. I mean, yeah, there's some modern things, but I'm teaching that a certain way. I don't need much in the way of notes about that anymore. However, when I first started, yes, I did more. So I would say, yes, that would be notes to yourself as you need them. Yes. Yeah, I understand. That I've struggled with that too. How much do you give them, and how much do you give them on the slide? And so, again, some areas I just take more and more off. I really just have the words, and then I define them in class. And I give a couple examples. But I also, I'm very familiar with some of that. Other things that I'm not as familiar with, yeah, then the slides are a little bit busier, a little bit more. Sure. Gabriel. If there was a magic answer, I would give it to you. Yeah, that's fun. I'm going to tell you the one thing you need to do. No, that's a tough one. There are, people that, on the one extreme where they'll call out anybody who's on a cell phone, and there's other ones that do not. I generally, it's just my advice, and I know other people do differently, and other people do very, very well doing that. I try to just be polite and just say, please try not to do this. When I've been in large classes, like a couple times in 138, I don't know, that's a bad vibe in 138. There's a bad smell in 138, but there's a bad vibe in 138 too. And sometimes the classes are just particularly loud there, and then I'll just kind of stop. I mean, I know it sounds sort of junior highish, but I'll just sort of stop and I'll go, it needs to be quiet so that everybody can hear. And usually just saying that, and then it dies down. Yeah, I don't do, knock it off. Hey, you. I don't do that. You can do that, and again, it can be effective, if you want to live under that kind of regime. I try just sort of being polite about those things, and usually that works. The harder thing is, one of my big struggles is when, and I'm sure everybody has it to a degree. Sometimes we have it in psych where we've got people that they have some questionable, family history, etc. They sit in the front row, and they tell you everything about their family. The rest of the class is rolling their eyes behind them, but they don't see that or know about it. And so, but I pull, I don't embarrass that student. I pull them aside afterwards. I said, if you want to ask me some questions, you can kind of do that, but you really can't take up class time like that. And they're usually like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And again, they're kind of clueless. That's why they're sitting in the front. So sometimes they have to like that. Normally what you're trying to do is to encourage classroom discussion. So we're not trained to discourage it. It's like, oh, I don't even know how to do that, because you think you're never going to get too much. But sometimes there is too much sharing. You probably all had somebody like that. And then I usually do that sort of outside. And sometimes at a portion of the class, afterwards, I might go up to that area and I say, hey, you guys are kind of watching, a video and kind of laughing. I said, that's kind of disturbing. I would do something like that. But I can't tell you that's the best way to do it. But Shane.
This is kind of building off the first question. My slides are very much like yours. They're my notes. Might be one word I talk about it. This my students talk about it for 5-6 minutes, and I'll tell students like, listen, don't just write down my notes every time I change a slide. Fill in the context. Focus on taking that one word and expanding with what I'm saying. And I've tried it a million different ways, and it's still. I just flip slides and you see the hands go like this, right? So do you have any tips on how to encourage them to take more effective notes?
I struggle with the same thing. And I put a version of my notes, not usually everything, but I put a version of my notes up on Blackboard before. And I tell them, I said, print these out so you don't have to copy anything that's already on the slide. Copy what I'm saying. I mean, write down what I'm saying. And a third of the students do that? What are the other 2/3 doing? I don't know. I mean, like, well, I'm going to write this all down. Why? It's right there. I mean, I'm giving it to you. You don't need it. It's really an outline, though. And I know some people are worried. They're like, well, if I put the slides up, then they won't come to class. Mine are an outline. It's an outline. It's sort of like, it's an outline. It's like looking at the text. I mean, yeah, you can just read the whole text. Okay, yes. Okay. And, but I want them to come to class, and there's other things that I talk about that I said are not quite in the textbook, depending on the topic. But again, I don't know an easy way to do that, other than to again, try to tell them, I said, it's the context that we're talking about in class. And then hopefully your exams illustrate that and show that so that they're like, oh, he doesn't just want us to memorize definitions. He wants us to know this and this and this, ideally. Yes?
On big lectures, can you request, especially when you're doing a test or some quiz, can you request assistance to have like some sort of proctors or somebody helping you to avoid?
Yeah, usually, now I don't know about all of the colleges. In liberal arts, you can get a grader to help you with a course if it's 50 or above. And so now sometimes it's difficult to kind of arrange to have that person be available on those exam days. But typically when I've had the really large ones that are like 200, I have the proctors there. I mean, I have my graders there. They're helping to proctor, but they're also helping to take the exam because I have them turn in the exam and a Scantron answer sheet for the multiple choice, and then a short answer for the short answers, and kind of, keeping those separate. And sometimes I have two versions, so we have to keep, there's the blue ones and there's the white ones, and we're kind of doing that. But you can have people help you if it's a grader, if it's a class of 50, although I know that's not true in all the other colleges. So I don't want to open up a can of worms about, other colleges. But in liberal arts, it's 50. If you get to 50, then you're able to get a grader. And then that's just sort of up to you to try to work. And if that person, I guess, is not available at that time, I might see if maybe you could swap, with somebody else who's got one, and so that I might be able to use somebody else's grader to proctor my exam, and then they use mine. I mean, something like that. That's a possibility. Josh.
Hey, sir. If you've ever been, because I'm currently dealing with this currently, I have an afternoon class, and they tend to be relatively low energy at times, and even when I try to increase the amount of engagement and participation, I'll find myself in situations where they seemingly will not respond to even like just regular questions that aren't really right or wrong, just eliciting their feedback. What advice would you provide me in trying to amend that situation?
Well, I know this is sort of tired advice, but one is to wait. And I know that's hard. I mean, I remember people said, well, when you ask a question to the class, wait. But if you're waiting 15 seconds, that's an eternity, right, of silence. I mean, normally we wait like 3 seconds, but that's one. It's sort of like, and I have done that when no one will say anything. And I'm like, well, and I don't, it's like, all right, we'll just wait. I mean, it's not a competition, but I will wait. And I'm sort of like, okay, and then I will wait. And usually, again, it's like they get uncomfortable too. Everyone gets uncomfortable. Okay, so you ever going to say anything, and we wait 10, and we wait 15, and then somebody will say something. So that's one possibility, is really just give them more than 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And then I think, that has worked for me a couple times. But until I experienced it, That's one of those things when you're new to teaching and somebody says, well, classes can have really different personalities. I don't know. I'm like, yeah, right. But then you see it and you're like, I mean, I got a 9 o'clock class, a 10 o'clock class, and they're night and day. And you're like, well, this is the same class. But you see that. And so sometimes in the afternoon you have to struggle. I mean, I've heard that just about every time. It's like, oh, I can't do it at night because the students don't have any energy. I can't do it in the morning. Students don't have any energy. It's right before lunch. They're all hungry. It's right after lunch. They're all thinking. I mean, it's, But I understand, and it's definitely a true phenomenon, but I don't know exactly the way to solve that. Jennifer. Is there? I don't know. That's out of my area, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't really know. Does anybody else know?
I'm wondering if
I'm sorry.
there's any, like, classes here, like there are actually studio-based courses that have a large lecture class and then like a group of studio for any kind of studio-based course.
We don't so much have that, but we have had in communication courses where there's a large lecture and we have breakout sections. They're not doing studio work, but they're able to have smaller discussions, do presentations.
So are those different teachers then?
Yeah, we have graduate teaching assistants who usually are running the smaller sections off of that large lecture. It's kind of similar to almost kind of similar to the learning community model where, you have like a large lecture and then they work more specifically small groups on like research projects or kind of like interviewing and stuff like that with seminar sessions.
That's what I was wondering because I've been in that before, but I didn't know we have like a large lecture and then grad assistants taking over some sections. That's good to know.
Yeah, there's some. Joe?
I think Jane brings up a really good point because the learning community has a lot of resources. But if you're teaching the standalone lectures like Kevin and I do, you really have just you have the graders, but they don't really instruct. You have the SI. That does help. I mean, don't get me wrong, that does help. But I think a lot more responsibility is placed on the professor, to get these students through.
Yeah, and the graders really are. I mean, occasionally, right, they can do, a review session or something like that. But yeah, they're essentially grading for you and kind of doing some of the, nuts and bolts things. So yeah, that's a challenge. Yeah. I remember when laptops first were coming around, there was a lot of distrust. They're like, students are just surfing. This is very anecdotal, but I have probably visited, 6 or 8 of the large lecture classes and sat in the back. I would say 80% of the time, the students got the notes up. They've got the PowerPoint slides up. 80%. Now, it's not all the time, okay? But it's not like it's none of the time either. I always wanted to do this study. And CI 113, there's that little booth in the back. That's what I wanted to do is I thought I would like to be back there with some binoculars and just, actually check this, okay? I have to get IRB approval though because I'm, like there's this guy in the back with these binoculars, but I would like to do that, like, randomly 3 times during the lecture, let's just check all of the laptops and see where they are. Because I'd like to know that information. Because again, I sometimes hear like, well, no one's on. And then I hear like you, it's like, no, they are on. My experience has been, surprisingly, there's many of them that are on. I would say, again, 70 to 80% are generally engaged. And even if they're not, as you're right, maybe they're looking something up. I do that. I mean, I'm hearing something, I'm like, and I get on my phone and I'm Googling this and I'm like, well, I don't know this. What is this? I'm doing exactly the same thing. And that's good. Yeah, we should encourage that. You inspired them too much. They went off. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Focus back. Yeah. Focus back. Yeah. Well, I know we're just about out. Thing, one more.
What do you suggest if somebody wants to teach a large size math class? How do you manage that?
I'm not the one to answer that. I could make something up, but I would be making it up. So I don't really know. I mean, I've taught, statistics to 50, okay? I've never taught statistics to 200. And what would that be like? And I mean, I think actually it's difficult at that, because what I like to do is kind of walk them through steps. Like, all right, what would we do next? And then calculate the sum of squares. Okay, right, there we can do that, and then we just kind of do it on the board and But that I can do in a class of 50. I can't do in a class of 200, and so that would be kind of different. I don't know. Like I said, I told you, I'd just be making it up, and I just was making it up. Well, I know we're just about out of time. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. I appreciate that and for your suggestions. Thank you. Thank you.